morning, everybody. This is Marty from Dawgs blog. In the noontime report of the morning session of Frank Carson et al. Trial. This is January 16, 2019. Court was scheduled to start at 9 o'clock. Judge showed up around 9:10. A jury was brought up at 9:22. And the judge was on the bench at 9:27, so we did get a little bit late start. I noted when I walked into the courtroom and sat down that Mary Woody was sitting in the courtroom on the prosecution side, and Robert Woody was paying a lot of attention to her. And Kurt Bunch had gone over to her and asked her to leave the courtroom. I don't know if she's on the witness list or what it was, but she was asked to leave the courtroom. She did leave under protest and talking about how chicken shit this whole thing was as she was going out the door. So whatever that's worth. Regardless, the jury was brought up at 9:27. Marlissa Ferrer started her direct again of Robert Woody, and she's talking about after the Corey Kaufman's homicide, did he see Frank Carson again? He said yes, he did. Was Frank Carson acting any different? He said no, he seemed the same. He said that Frank Carson was always the same. She asked him again about on his 3/1 of 14 interview about when he stated that Bobby was going over to Frank Carson property. He said yes. And Bobby Atwell was checking his Frank Carson's property for 2 to 5 days prior. Bobby was trying to see if there's anybody accessing the properties or any type of activity going on over there in regards to the thefts. If he was asked whether Bobby said anything to anyone else when he was leaving the store, and he said he did not recall what he had told officers during that interview. She asked him how he knew that was a lie, because he said he was there and he knows that he had been involved in killing of Corey Kaufman. On March 1st, a 2014 interview, it was John Evers, Kurt Bunch, and Steve Jacobson said numerous lies that he had told on who killed Corey Kaufman. He said he was protecting the Atwells. He didn't want anything to happen to him. He was concerned for his safety. Something like he could go missing too. Melissa Ferrer asked him why was he not truthful from the start. He said he was too scared. And then when she asked him about Scott McFarlane and heard Scott McFarlane had done something to Corey Kaufman, And Scott McFarland was talking about some activities that he had been doing with Corey Kaufman prior to the homicide, like stopping the cars, doing surveillance on the house, as in regard to thefts of his property and apparently maybe other properties too. I don't know. He wasn't really clear. But Corey Kaufman and Kevin Pickett, as Scott McFarland was watching the house, which was his neighbors, where Kevin Pickett and Corey Kaufman lived. Robert Woody said he didn't know Corey Kaufman at that time. Scott McFarland, Woody said, had been talking about these things at the store, and it was good. Bobby and Dee Atwell said, they said it was good that to work these people over. And after, shortly thereafter, Corey Kaufman went missing. Marlissa Ferrer started to go in an area where, after he'd been taken into custody, and he made a phone call to his brother Brian, and that was objected to and went to a sidebar. She came back going in another direction on her questioning, and then she went to show Robert Woody evidence number 735, which is the plea agreement the testimonial agreement that Robert Woody has with the district attorney's office in this case. Again, that led to another sidebar, and at this point the judge had to make some clarifications, as she couldn't remember previous rulings on what was going to be allowed in this. There was limiting motions in regards to this, and she couldn't remember what her ruling was, and it had to be researched, as she was having another moment where she couldn't recall. The jury was sent out at 10:25. And I noticed too, just before the jury was sent out, the Modesto B, Rosalio Rahumada, had come in and sat down, and he got there just in time to go to break. And he did sit with the district attorney's office the entire time that he was out in the hallway. When we came back from break, Judge Zuniga wanted to put it on the record because she couldn't recall what she had said before. Robert Woody was not on the stand at this time either. She said that the plea agreement, she's only allowing the first 2 pages, as there was a large amount of opinion that was inserted in the remainder of the plea by the district attorney's office. This is already ruled on by, and she could not remember the ruling, so she had to research it during the break. The defense asked that the Robert Woody plea agreement be sanitized, as there is improper language in that plea agreement, and I believe it's mostly after the first 2 pages, and they started going down paragraph by paragraph, and I don't know what they were talking about because they were just talking about paragraph numbers. But the judge said we're only going to allow the first 2 pages. That's it anyway. So that's just the plea agreement itself that was signed by Robert Woody and his attorney. Robert Woody was back on the stand, and the jury was up at 11:14. Marlissa Ferrer continuing with her direct. Again, she's showing him evidence number 735. That's his testimonial agreement. And that it was agreement to participate in all court activities in this case for considerations. He had pled. He was facing a first-degree homicide and an arson charge and an obstruction of justice charge. He pled to what they call a 192 PC. That's a manslaughter, obstruction, and the arson charge. His total exposure on all 3 of them aggregated, it was 7 years, 4 months. Marlissa Ferrer asked him who shot Corey Kaufman. He said he did not shoot Corey Kaufman. He said Daljeet Atwell shot Corey Kaufman. At this time, Marlissa Ferrer said no further questions, and Attorney Hans began his cross-examination of Robert Woody. Hans asked him, if he's been in custody since February. I believe it was the end of February in 2014. So he's been in custody about 5 years now. And he asked him if he received a plea for considerations for less time to object. After that 3 days that he was on the run, he turned himself in to Kurt Bunch. He had been up for 3 days, and Kurt Bunch said he had information on the Corey Kaufman homicide. He turned himself in around 8 o'clock at night, and he was questioned for a long period of time that night. The interview went on until way early in the morning, almost the next morning. And officers kept telling him they had his confession on a recording on that body wire by Miranda Dawgs. Robert Woody said that he had made statements to Miranda Dawgs, but they were all lies. He was just trying to impress her. The story that he had told to Miranda Dawgs was a story that he had been hearing on the streets, and he'd been hearing on the streets that he was involved in it. Steve Jacobson, during that interview, had referred to different photos of Daljeet Atwal and Frank Carson, saying that they were involved. Robert Woody says he did not recall how he responded or if they even did that. Steve Jacobson was telling him they will accuse Robert Woody for being the one that did this. Robert Woody said, "How can that be?" In the interview, he said, "How can that be?" And on the stand, he's saying he didn't really recall saying that. That's kind of a blur to him. Reading the transcript, and to refresh, and he says it doesn't really refresh, but that's what it does say, yes. He also noted that he did spend 3 days at the DA's office a couple of months ago refreshing all the transcripts, recordings, both video and audio. And he was watching those recordings and listening to those audios with a transcript. He tried to explain to Kurt Bunch about the Miranda Dawgs statements. Everyone else on the street was saying that he had done this. He was asked if Kurt Bunch told him that he was the least involved and had the less responsibility in all this. He didn't recall that. He was reading the transcript again, trying to refresh. He still didn't recall the statement. He doesn't remember hardly anything that night. He was running hard and long for several days on meth and alcohol when he was finally taken into custody. Frank Carson said he told Kurt Bunch told Robert Woody he was at the Frank Carson property with Daljeet Atwal and involved in the homicide of Corey Kaufman. That makes him guilty of homicide with special circumstances. At the very least, it's a life without the possibility of parole, where he could get the death penalty. Robert Woody still at this point was denying any involvement to Kurt Bunch and the other investigators. Hans asked him if he would lie to avoid the death penalty. He said, "No, I wouldn't lie to avoid the death penalty." But at the prelim, he did say he would lie to avoid the death penalty. He said he didn't recall saying that. I recall him saying that. So they read the transcript, and then the testimony that he would lie to not face the death penalty. and now he has pleas to lower the charges. So Kurt Bunch had told him that he was facing life without the possibility of parole, or even worse, a death penalty. Now he's saying he would not lie to avoid a death penalty, and he's going in to the areas where he was lying about or telling different stories throughout. It was also noted that Robert Woody said in that interview, "You hear a lot of things out of my mouth. Sometimes they don't make sense. I just don't understand a lot of things," or something to that effect. Kurt Bunch said he had heard from Robert Woody right out of his mouth, and he words right out of his mouth, and he said, "Ha ha ha, yeah, I know," something to that effect. And again, Robert Woody was not familiar at all with what he was talking about. He didn't recall that night at all, but they were more than willing to keep him talking. Also noted too that Hans had given the bait stamp, which is the page identifier on the in the transcript where he was reading from, and he gave the page and the line number, the bait stamp and the line numbers and stuff that he was referring to, and Judge Zuniga interrupted him, was totally lost at what he had tried to tell her, and he had to remind her, and finally she caught on to what he was saying. Judge Zuniga was having a hard time comprehending things this morning. It also said in that interview that Kurt Bunch had told Robert Woody that he's convicted people with a lot less evidence than what they have here. Robert Woody again says he didn't recall any of that being said. Like I said, he doesn't recall anything from that night. He doesn't recall from being refreshed with a transcript. Attorney Hans is going to have him listen to an audio, put the headphones on, listen to an audio to help his recollect what was said. But we were right at the right at lunch break anyway. The jury was sent out, and Woody was sent off the stand, and we'll have him listen to that audio right after lunch. Hans said it's going to be less than a minute. He's just going to have him listen to that one section of the audio. So we'll be back at 1:30 with more cross-examined by the defense on Robert Woody. And don't forget the podcast tonight. It may get interesting. We'll see.